Ayesha is a lonely girl who lost her mother at birth, and after her father remarries, her life slowly turns into a nightmare. Her stepmother and stepbrothers treat her like she does not belong, and when her father dies, things only get worse. But this is not a story about waiting for a prince to save her, because the moment a hidden inheritance is revealed, greed takes over the entire household. Betrayal turns into murder, and even Ayesha herself becomes a target. And just when her stepmother thinks she is gone, she comes back to life. From that point on, the story becomes a dark revenge mystery filled with twisted family secrets, shocking reveals, and a final twist that changes everything you thought you knew about her. The chapter begins with a couple talking about the child they hope to have. The husband, Gwen, asks his wife Norma when they will finally have a child. Norma smiles softly and replies that she hopes their child will be born during a season like this one. She says she wants their child to be as warm and bright as the sunlight itself. However, days turn into months, and before long, winter arrives. As snow falls around them, Gwen asks his wife why their little angel still has not arrived. He gently says that perhaps their child prefers winter, and that maybe this will finally be the month. Meanwhile, Norma scoops snow into her hands and quietly replies that she hopes their child will be as pure and perfect as the winter snow. But during the winter of the following year, Norma finally goes into labor. As she cries out in pain, Gwen desperately tells her to hang on and says that he will go find a doctor right away. However, Norma quickly stops him and tells him no. She begs him to stay with her. Gwen explains that all of the servants have already returned to visit their own families and that the blizzard has completely cut off the mountain. At that moment, Gwen falls to his knees and begins to pray to God. He says that all he has ever wanted is a child and desperately begs for both Norma and the baby to be blessed and protected. Meanwhile, Norma struggles through the pain for the entire night, and after hours of suffering, she finally gives birth to their child. Hours later, exhausted and barely able to move, Norma weakly smiles and looks toward her husband. In a faint voice, she asks him whether their child is a boy or a girl. Gwen looks down at the baby and tells her that it is a girl. Hearing that, Norma smiles and says that it is wonderful. She then asks if the baby is beautiful. But Gwen softly replies that he cannot really tell yet until after they have given her a bath. Norma lets out a weak laugh and says that their child must be beautiful. After all, the Lord has finally answered her prayers. However, as Norma continues speaking, her breathing slowly becomes weaker. Noticing this, Gwen immediately asks what is wrong. Norma quietly answers that she is just very tired. A moment later, she tells her husband that when she leaves before him, but before she can finish her sentence, Norma asks Gwen to come closer. As he leans near her, Norma whispers a secret into his ear, a secret that would remain hidden, known only by the two of them. And not long after giving birth to her daughter, Norma dies. 8 years later, after the death of his first wife, Gwen has remarried. His new wife is named Sylvia. One day, Sylvia finally returns home from a trip. As she steps out of the carriage, she immediately tells the servants to be careful with her belongings, reminding them that everything she brought back is expensive, especially the trunks. After entering the house, Sylvia is greeted by the bright smiles of her three sons. Excitedly, they ask her what she brought back for them. One by one, Sylvia hands each of them a gift. To one son, she gives a famous painting from overseas. To another, she gives a machete from East Asia. And to the third, she gives a hunting rifle, although she makes it clear that it's not loaded. After Sylvia finishes giving presents to her sons, Gwen comments that there is already more than enough rubbish in the basement and asks why she did not buy more tobacco instead. Sylvia simply smiles and replies that of course she did not forget about her husband. She says that she even brought him cigars all the way from Cuba. After receiving the cigars, Gwen suddenly asks Sylvia if she has not forgotten about Ayesha. At that moment, Ayesha appears. She is Gwen's first daughter, the child born from his first wife, Norma, who died after giving birth to her. Sylvia smiles and hands Ayesha a beautiful muslin dress embroidered with silk. She asks the little girl if she likes it. Surprised, Ayesha quietly asks if it's really for her. Sylvia smiles and says that yes, it is for her, but only if Ayesha starts calling her mother. Instead of answering, Ayesha remains completely silent. The moment Sylvia sees that, her expression changes. Pretending to examine the dress, she suddenly says that there seems to be a hole in it. And before anyone can react, she intentionally tears the dress apart. Immediately, Sylvia pretends to apologize and says that she was simply being careless. After that, she hands the ruined dress to the servant, Anne, and tells her to take it away, saying that something like that could never be given as a present. She then turns back toward Ayesha and apologizes again, telling her that she will buy her something even better next time. But before Ayesha can say anything, one of her stepbrothers suddenly calls her an ugly beast. And even though Gwen watches his own daughter being bullied right in front of him, he says nothing. Instead, he simply calls for the servant Anne to help him up the stairs. Later, while the brothers are outside playing football, the oldest brother Carlo begins insulting the youngest, Nemo. He tells him that he is terrible at everything and says that he should just go back inside the house and play with his pencils. Not long after, the football suddenly flies toward Ayesha and hits her. As Carlo looks at her, he loudly yells at her to stay away and calls her a beast. He says that the ball has no eyes. After being hit and insulted again, Ayesha can no longer hold it in. She turns around and runs away while crying. Meanwhile, her stepbrothers continue yelling after her, telling her to piss off and never come near them again. Later that night, Nemo suddenly knocks on the door to Ayesha's room and tells her to open it. When Ayesha opens the door, Nemo apologizes and tells her that he is sorry on behalf of his brothers. After that, Nemo says that he even brought her a special gift just for her. He hands her a small box and excitedly tells her to open it. As Ayesha slowly lifts the lid, her eyes immediately widen in horror. Inside is a pile of dead insects, and even worse, some of the cockroaches are still moving. The insects suddenly begin to crawl out of the box. The moment Ayesha sees them, she screams in terror and starts panicking. But as she does, Nemo and the others burst out laughing after seeing the look on her face. The next morning, Ayesha is sitting all by herself on the edge of the fountain when the servant Anne quietly approaches her and asks what she is thinking about. A moment later, Anne tells Ayesha that she made a gown for her to wear with her dress. Hearing that, Ayesha smiles for what feels like the first time in a long while and softly thanks her. After that, Ayesha asks Anne why she is always so kind to her. Anne gently explains that Ayesha's mother used to take very good care of her when she was still alive, and that she respected her deeply. She says that every time she looks at Ayesha, she is reminded of her mother. Anne also tells her that she practically raised her herself and that she knows Ayesha and her family better than anyone else in the house. Finally, Anne quietly admits that she knows Ayesha is having a very difficult time, but as a servant, this is all she can do for her. However, Sylvia has been listening to the entire conversation. Suddenly, she appears and coldly says that it breaks her heart to hear Anne speak that way. As Ayesha begins nervously trying to take off the gown, Sylvia quickly stops her and tells her not to remove it. She walks closer to Ayesha and says that she should not make it sound as though she is some evil stepmother from a fairy tale. Sylvia looks at her and tells her that she looks very pretty. She adds that she may not be as capable as Ayesha's real mother was, but that she never intended to play the role of the evil stepmother. And before leaving, Sylvia quietly says that perhaps she simply is not very good at handling her emotions. However, only a few days later, Anne is fired. As Anne slowly walks away into the distance, Ayesha silently watches her leave. While staring at her, Ayesha begins thinking about her real mother. She has only ever seen her through old portraits and no longer remembers what kind of person she truly was. And after Sylvia entered the family, all of her mother's portraits disappeared one by one. At that moment, Ayesha quietly asks herself what is going to happen to her from now on. And for the first time, she feels truly terrified. Several years later, Sylvia is alarmed by the sound of a servant screaming in panic. The servants have found Gwen lying motionless on the stairs. As Sylvia rushes over, she immediately snaps at the servant and tells her to stop making such a racket, saying that Gwen only took a small fall and that she is going to frighten the children. But when Gwen still does not move, Sylvia quickly kneels beside him and desperately tells him to get up. She asks him what is wrong. However, the moment Sylvia checks whether he is still breathing, her expression changes.
Gwen is already dead. And as soon as she realizes it, Sylvia breaks down crying and says that her dear Gwen is gone. Meanwhile, Ayesha can only watch everything from a distance. She does not dare go any closer. For a long time now, this man has not loved her like a father. But the real reason she stays away is because she is terrified of the word death. Later, at the funeral, everyone mourns the unfortunate man who has passed away. Sylvia cries over the death of her husband, but Aisha remains completely silent. She stands there calmly and does not shed a single tear. Seeing that, Carlo immediately begins mocking her. He asks how she can stand there without crying even though her father is dead, and once again he calls her a vile beast. After that, Carlo tells Nemo to pick his nose and wipe it on Aisha. Not long after, unable to bear it anymore, Aisha quietly leaves by herself and walks toward the forest. However, Carlo and Nemo immediately follow after her while laughing. As they chase her deeper into the woods, Carlo keeps throwing things at her while calling her a beast. He cruelly tells her that she has no one to tattle to anymore. Even so, Aisha says nothing. She simply keeps walking deeper and deeper into the forest. Eventually, Carlo and Nemo finally leave. And after holding back her feelings for so many years, Aisha can no longer endure it. She runs farther into the forest and finally breaks down. Collapsing onto the ground beneath the trees, she curls up into herself and begins sobbing uncontrollably. As she covers her face with both hands, she cries from all the pain, loneliness, and sadness she has kept buried inside for so long. But suddenly, someone appears. It is Sean, the second son. As he looks down at her, Sean asks if crying can really make the pain go away. He slowly kneels beside her and explains that whenever he is hurting, the only thing that makes him feel better is making someone else suffer even more. Sean tells Aisha that when she acts weak like this, people only want to torment her even further. Then he looks directly at her and asks if she actually enjoys being bullied. Suddenly, Sean pulls out an ornate knife and asks her if she knows what it is. Terrified, Aisha can only stare at it. Sean quietly tells her that if she ever became brave enough, he would give the knife to her. But before she can react, Sean suddenly grabs her hand and presses the blade into her palm. Aisha stares at it in shock as blood slowly begins running across her hand. Meanwhile, Sean quietly tells her that if he ever wanted to torment someone, he would make sure that person feared him and obeyed him for the rest of their life. Later, after that, it was explained that after Gwen's death, all of his inheritance fell into Sylvia's hands. And because Aisha looks so much like Norma, Sylvia grows to hate her even more. Every time she looks at her, she is reminded of Gwen's first wife. From that point on, Sylvia criticizes everything Aisha does. No matter what happens, Aisha silently endures it all. She works harder than even the real servants in the house. Because deep down, Aisha knows that it's the only way to stop Sylvia from throwing her out of the house. Years pass, and one day, Aisha was quietly picking a flower in the garden when someone watched her from a distance. A whistle suddenly caught her attention, and when she looked up, she saw Carlo, the eldest son. By now, Aisha had grown into such a kind and beautiful young woman. Meanwhile, inside the house, someone was secretly painting her from afar, quietly admiring every little detail. It was Nemo. And whenever Sean, the second son, played the piano, Aisha could never stop herself from quietly sneaking in and listening from the corner of the room. But this time, Sean noticed her. He asked why she was staring at him like that, then suddenly asked if she wanted to learn how to play the piano too. Aisha immediately answered and said yes. Sean agreed to teach her, but first he asked to see her hands so he could decide if she was suitable for playing. After carefully examining them, Sean went silent. Then, as he turned to leave, he coldly told her that it was a shame. Her hands were too small, they were not fit to play an instrument as elegant as the piano. A little later, during lunch, Sylvia and her three sons sat together at the table while Ayesha served them like one of the household servants. Nemo asked if all the dishes were ready, then told Ayesha to sit down and eat with them. But Sylvia immediately interrupted and said that from now on, Ayesha should eat in the kitchen instead. She explained that since Ayesha spent all day working there anyway, it would make things easier for her. Ayesha quietly agreed and politely said that she would return to the kitchen right away, calling Sylvia my lady. But Carlo immediately objected. He asked his mother why Ayesha had to eat in the kitchen when she was their little sister and part of the family. Then, with a smile, Carlo called Ayesha over and asked her to sit beside him. The entire room fell silent. After a brief pause, Sylvia forced herself to agree and said that Carlo was already a grown man with opinions of his own. And so, Ayesha sat beside Carlo and softly thanked him, while Sylvia quietly watched the two of them growing closer. A little while later, while Ayesha was cleaning, Sylvia stood upstairs holding a cup of hot coffee. She silently watched Ayesha for a moment, and then, on purpose, she dropped the cup. The hot coffee spilled all over Ayesha. Sylvia immediately pretended to apologize, saying that her hand had slipped. Then she quickly called for a servant named Bella and ordered her to clean everything up. Bella hurried over at once. She looked at Ayesha and quickly told her to go change her clothes. But Ayesha quietly replied that it was all right. However, Bella insisted. She told her that the coffee was still hot and that the stains would be very difficult to wash away. Ayesha lowered her head and admitted that she did not have any other clothes to change into. At that, Bella quietly told her that Sylvia seemed to dislike her. Then Bella offered to let Ayesha change in her room instead. She explained that her clothes were only simple linen, but at least they were clean. Even so, Ayesha gently thanked her and refused, saying that Bella would only get fired for helping her. Before leaving, Ayesha quietly told her that she would figure something out herself. Later, Ayesha went down to the river to wash her clothes. With nothing else to wear, she sat there in only her underwear, staring blankly into the distance, completely lost in thought. But at that moment, Sean suddenly appeared behind her. He called her a poor little princess. Then he asked if she had an imaginary friend. Startled, Ayesha immediately stood up and covered herself. Sean only let out a faint laugh. He asked if he was somehow less charming than his two brothers. Then he added that he was simply curious how someone with no one to rely on managed to spend such a lonely and painful life. Ayesha quietly replied that he was right. She had no friends, not even imaginary ones. She was completely alone. Sean answered that he could never quite understand how she felt. He said that he had always assumed that someone as weak as her would have several imaginary friends. Then, with a strange smile, he added that it was a shame she preferred being alone. Still, he admitted that maybe being alone had its own advantages. At least, she would never become schizophrenic. Then, as Sean started to leave, he glanced back at her and quietly hinted that he would not mind having an imaginary friend himself, preferably someone exactly like him. After that, more days passed, and little by little, Carlo and Ayesha began growing even closer. The two of them rode horses together, laughing side by side. But from a distance, Sylvia silently watched them, and the closer they became, the more bothered she looked. Later, Sylvia went to Nemo's room and knocked on the door, saying that she wanted to talk to him. But no one answered. After waiting for a moment, Sylvia finally opened the door and stepped inside. The moment she entered, she froze. The walls were covered in portraits of Ayesha. Painting after painting filled the room. Then Sylvia noticed an easel hidden beneath a cloth, as if Nemo had been trying to hide whatever was underneath. Curious, she pulled the cloth away, and the moment she saw what was hidden underneath, she was completely shocked. It was a painting of Ayesha in a withdrawn and melancholy pose that looked far too seductive. At that exact moment, Nemo walked into the room. Without hesitation, Sylvia immediately began tearing the painting apart. Nemo desperately tried to stop her, but it was already too late. The painting was ruined. As Nemo dropped to his knees, he looked up at his mother and asked her why she would do such a thing. But Sylvia coldly told him that he needed to understand. Ayesha was his so-called older sister. And on top of that, she was only a servant. Then Sylvia declared that she would marry Ayesha off very soon. Nemo immediately begged her not to send Ayesha away. He told her that Ayesha was a source of his inspiration. She was his entire life. But Sylvia ignored every word and walked out of the room. Later, while Ayesha was again quietly listening to Sean play the piano, Sylvia noticed her standing there and called her over. Sylvia asked if she had started to like Sean. Ayesha quickly answered no. She said that she only liked listening to him play. Then Sylvia reminded her that she was almost old enough to marry. Ayesha quietly agreed and said that she would turn 19 next month. Sylvia then told her that it was finally time for her to go out into the world and live a happy life. Confused, Ayesha asked what she meant. Sylvia explained that her cousin's son planned to marry this year. He owned a large farm with dozens of servants. According to Sylvia, it would surely be a happy marriage. But Ayesha immediately disagreed. She said that she did not want to go anywhere. She wanted to stay here for the rest of her life. She promised that she would do anything Sylvia wanted. Then Sylvia asked if her brothers had been kind to her. Ayesha softly answered yes. She said that she loved them very much. Hearing that, Sylvia calmly explained that even though Ayesha wasn't her real daughter, she was still legally part of the family. That means her sons were still Ayesha's brothers. She went on to say that one day they would marry other women and inherit the family business. Meanwhile, Ayesha would only be left behind, forced to watch everyone else find happiness while she slowly grew old alone. Then, Sylvia asked her if she was truly alright with that. The room fell silent. After a brief pause, Ayesha quietly agreed, and then as Sylvia walked away, she told Ayesha that she hoped she would reconsider. Later, during a grand family banquet, one of Sylvia's relatives smiled and said that now that Carl and Ayesha were both here, they should get along. Then Sylvia told Ayesha to greet Carl, her nephew. Ayesha quietly greeted him. Carl smiled back at her and immediately called her beautiful. Then, without hesitation, he said that he had been dying to meet his future wife. Sylvia calmly explained that Carl had taken quite a liking to her. But at that exact moment, Carlos suddenly stood up. He called for everyone's attention. He looked directly at his mother and aunt and said that he wanted to use this opportunity to make an announcement. Then, right in front of everyone, Carlo declared that he had decided to marry Ayesha. The entire room instantly fell silent. Sylvia immediately told him to sit down. She asked if he even understood what he was saying and that Ayesha was his sister. But Carlo answered that everyone already knew they weren't related by blood, so there was nothing to worry about. However, Sylvia and the rest of the family strongly disagreed. They reminded him that they belonged to an influential family. He had to think about the consequences of his actions. There were countless other young women he could marry, but Carlo didn't care. As he held on to Ayesha, he looked at everyone and declared that he didn't give a damn what any of them thought. He loved Ayesha, and he was going to marry her. At that, Sylvia finally snapped and said, "Enough." Then she asked Carlo if he was trying to humiliate her in front of everyone. A month later, someone suddenly arrived at the mansion. The man introduced himself as a close friend and lawyer of Sylvia's late husband, Gwen. He said his name was Kirkwall. Sylvia politely welcomed him and asked what he had come for. Kirkwall explained that Gwen had left a will in his care and instructed him to give it to Ayesha when she came of age and to make sure it was carried out. Confused, Sylvia immediately asked about the will. She said that Gwen had died so suddenly and as far as she knew, he had never left one behind. But the lawyer gave a faint laugh and explained that the will had actually been written years ago, back when Ayesha's mother, Norma, was still alive. Hearing that, Sylvia quickly asked if anyone else knew the will existed. She wondered why she, as Gwen's wife and Ayesha's stepmother, had never heard about it. However, the lawyer explained that Gwen must have had his own reasons for keeping it a secret. He told her that he was obligated to protect his client's confidentiality, and added that he still had another copy of the will back at his office. After that, the lawyer asked Sylvia if he could have a moment alone with Ayesha so he could tell her about the will himself. But Sylvia apologized and explained that Ayesha had gone to town to buy clothes and wouldn't be back until very late. She told him to come back another day, and she would deliver the will to her herself. However, the lawyer calmly replied that it was fine, and he could simply wait. So, to pass the time, Sylvia suggested that she show him around the estate, and Kirkwall agreed. Not long after, the two of them went down into the wine cellar. While they were there, Sylvia asked Kirkwall if he drank wine. The lawyer smiled and explained that he used to sit in that very cellar with Gwen, drinking together all night. Just thinking about it made him feel nostalgic. But only a few moments later, after drinking a bottle, Kirkwall suddenly passed out. As Sylvia quietly stared at the unconscious lawyer, she slowly reached into his suit and pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was Gwen's will. The paper read, to prevent any disputes over the distribution of his inheritance, he appointed his lawyer Kirkwall as the executor and trustee of his estate. The will also stated that Kirkwall was to deliver it to Ayesha when she came of age. And finally, it revealed that Gwen was leaving everything he owned to Ayesha. The entire estate, £6 million kept in the bank, and all of the surrounding land. Everything would belong to Ayesha. The moment she finished reading it, she was completely shocked. She just stood there staring at the lawyer in silence, as if a terrible idea had suddenly entered her mind. And then, later that same night, while Ayesha was inside her room hanging up her clothes, she noticed someone outside dragging a large box across the ground. Curious, Ayesha looked closer, and to her surprise, she realized it was Sylvia slowly making her way deep into the forest while dragging the heavy box behind her. The next morning, while Carlo was gently holding Ayesha's hand, he suddenly asked her to run away with him. He told her that the two of them should leave the house and go somewhere far away, somewhere no one could ever come between them again. Ayesha looked at him and asked how they were supposed to survive out there. But Carlo already had an answer. He said they could buy a small farm. He would take care of the cattle and she could shear the sheep. Hearing that, Ayesha asked him if he was really serious, and Carlo immediately told her that of course he was. He said that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. Then, as he gently pulled her into his arms, Carlo whispered that no one could stop him from loving her, not even his own mother. Meanwhile, Sylvia stood quietly nearby, secretly watching the two of them. And as she watched her own son being taken away by the child she hated more than anyone, tears slowly ran down her face. Later that night, while the family was having dinner, Carlo kept trying to feed Ayesha himself. But Ayesha looked uncomfortable and softly asked him to stop. However, Carlo insisted, saying that he was worried about her because she had become far too thin. At that moment, Sylvia suddenly noticed the new dress Ayesha was wearing. She complimented it and asked where she had gotten it. But before Ayesha could answer, Carlo spoke up and said that he had bought it for her. He explained that he had recently realized Ayesha had not received any new clothes in a very long time, so he had bought several dresses for her. Then Carlo looked at his mother and asked if there was anything wrong with that. But Sylvia simply smiled. She said that she was glad he cared so much about his sister, because she herself had been neglecting her. Then she turned toward Ayesha and apologized. As soon as she heard that, Ayesha nervously started to remove the dress and quickly explained that she had asked Carlo to buy it for her. She said that if Lady Sylvia thought the clothes were inappropriate, she could send them back immediately. But Sylvia only gave a faint laugh and told her that the dress looked gorgeous on her. She even said that one day Ayesha should come and pick out a few dresses from her own wardrobe. The moment she said that, Sean suddenly started laughing. Sylvia turned toward Sean and asked what was so amusing. Sean calmly replied that it was nothing. He simply said that it was such a rare sight to see their family acting so warm and loving. To everyone's surprise, Ayesha agreed, but right after that, she suddenly looked at Sylvia and asked where she had gone the night before while dragging that large box. The moment Sylvia heard those words, she froze. After a brief silence, she asked Ayesha if she had really seen her. Ayesha agreed and explained that when she woke up in the middle of the night, she saw Sylvia heading into the forest with a large box. At that moment, Sean suddenly mentioned that he had heard from one of the servants that a lawyer had visited the mansion the day before. Then he looked at his mother and asked what business the lawyer had there. Sylvia calmly replied that the man had been Gwen's old friend and that he had come to deliver Gwen's will. The moment Carlo heard that, he immediately asked what the will said. But Sylvia lied. She told him that Gwen had left the family in her hands. She said that he had asked her to take good care of both the boys and Ayesha. And more importantly, she claimed that Gwen had asked her to find Ayesha a suitable husband. After that, Sylvia explained that she had shared a few drinks with the lawyer down in the wine cellar before seeing him off. However, Sean immediately asked what any of that had to do with her strange trip into the forest in the middle of the night. Sylvia smoothly explained that there had been a lot of useless junk stored in the cellar, so she had spent hours cleaning it out and throwing it away. But Carlo told her that she should have left that kind of work to the servants. Sylvia only smiled and replied that the servants had already been working all day. She said that she might be strict, but she was not cruel enough to wake them from their sweet dreams in the middle of the night. Later, after dinner, Ayesha was walking through the corridor carrying the plates they had used earlier. But suddenly, Sylvia grabbed her shoulder from behind. Startled, Ayesha turned around. Sylvia quietly told her that she was planning to go into the forest to pick mushrooms for soup. Then she asked her if she would like to come with her. Not long after that, the two of them were walking deep into the forest together. Ayesha commented that they had already gone very far. Then she asked why they had still not found even a single mushroom. Sylvia calmly explained that these mushrooms were especially soft and delicious, so even the animals always ate them before anyone else could find them. Then she told Ayesha that they should go just a little farther. But even after more than an hour of walking, they still hadn't found anything. Eventually, the two of them stopped to rest deep in the middle of the forest. As they sat there, Ayesha finally asked Sylvia if those mushrooms really existed. Sylvia looked at her and quietly asked if she did not believe her. Ayesha immediately answered no. But just then, Sylvia slowly stood up. And the moment she did, Ayesha noticed that Sylvia was holding something in her hand. Confused, she asked what it was. Sylvia slowly revealed that it was an axe. She explained that she had brought it along to cut away any branches that got in our path. But Ayesha quietly pointed out that the trees in this part of the forest were already very sparse. Still holding the axe, Sylvia calmly replied that she had only brought it just in case. After that, the two of them continued walking deeper and deeper into the dark forest. But a little while later, Ayesha began to grow uneasy. She quietly asked Sylvia if they could please go back. She said it was getting too dark and that they had already gone so far that there could even be bears nearby. Sylvia looked at her and asked if she was afraid of bears. Ayesha hesitated for a moment, then she looked back at Sylvia and asked the same question. But suddenly, Sylvia stopped walking. She slowly turned her head and glared directly at Ayesha. Then, in a cold voice, she asked if Ayesha was afraid of her. Terrified, Ayesha immediately dropped to her knees. She desperately begged Sylvia to let her go back home. She promised that she would listen to her from now on. She said that she would stay away from her brothers, and she begged Sylvia again and again to please let her go home. Sylvia stared down at her for a moment. Then she quietly asked if Ayesha hated her. With her whole body trembling, Ayesha immediately cried out that no, she did not hate her. She said that she did not hate anyone. But Sylvia suddenly screamed at her and demanded to know why she was always ruining everything for her. Ayesha quickly replied that she had never done anything. But Sylvia kept going. She asked why her own son would abandon his mother for her. By that point, Ayesha had completely collapsed to the ground. She apologized again and again. She begged Sylvia to believe her and said that all she had ever wanted was a happy life. She told her that she truly did not hate her at all and that she understood her. But the moment she said that, Sylvia suddenly burst into a twisted, manic laugh. Then, without warning, she raised the axe and attacked Ayesha. As she struck her, Sylvia screamed that Ayesha should understand why a mother whose son had been stolen from her would want to kill a thief like her. The moment the axe came down, Ayesha's blood splashed across Sylvia's face. Ayesha collapsed onto the ground. Blood spilled from her mouth as she struggled to breathe. But Sylvia slowly walked over to her. Then she bent down beside her, gently covered Ayesha's eyes with one hand, and softly called her her innocent little princess. She told her to go and live in a fairy tale because she didn't belong in this cruel reality. And with that, Sylvia said her final goodbye. But without Sylvia knowing, someone had been quietly watching everything from the shadows. The following night, everyone was once again sitting around the dining table as if nothing had happened. While they were eating, Carlos suddenly commented that he hadn't seen Ayesha all day. Then he turned toward his mother and asked where she had gone. Sylvia calmly explained that Ayesha had said she wanted to visit Carl's farm, so she had allowed her to go. The moment Carlo heard Carl's name, he immediately became angry. He called Carl nothing more than a freckled country bumpkin. But Sylvia coldly replied that in any case, a country bumpkin with a farm would still make a far better husband for Ayesha than him. Then Sylvia added that he would be sending Carlo away to the military the very next day. Carlo immediately stood up from his chair in anger. He shouted that he was not going anywhere and that he was going to find Ayesha himself. But Sylvia sharply told him to stop. Then, in a cold voice, she said that Ayesha was not coming back. And at that exact moment, the front door slowly creaked open. Everyone turned toward it in shock. Standing there was Ayesha, but something about her looked terribly wrong. Her face was blank, and her wide, empty eyes made it seem as though she had come back from the dead. Around her neck was a deep wound, the mark left behind by the axe from the night before. The moment everyone saw her, they froze with their mouths hanging open. Then, without saying a word, Ayesha slowly walked toward the dining table and sat down. Carlos stared at her in disbelief before finally asking what had happened to her neck. But Ayesha simply tilted her head back and ran a hand through her hair. Then she said in a strangely calm voice that she had fallen and hurt herself yesterday. And she softly told him to not worry, because it would heal very soon. As Carlo and Nemo continued staring at her in complete disbelief, Sean simply smiled. Meanwhile, Ayesha slowly turned and looked directly at Sylvia. Yet instead of seeming angry or afraid, she looked strangely calm. Then, in a quiet voice, she said that she was starving. The next morning, Sylvia suddenly ran deep into the forest, back to the exact place where she had killed Ayesha. The moment she arrived, she immediately dropped to her knees and began digging up the spot where she had buried Ayesha's body. But after several minutes of desperately digging through the dirt, Sylvia froze in shock. Ayesha's body was gone. Later that night, while everyone was sitting around the same dining table, Carlos suddenly asked Ayesha how the injury on her neck was doing. Ayesha calmly replied that the scar had not completely faded yet, but thankfully the choker was the perfect size to hide it. The moment Sylvia heard her mention the choker, she looked confused and immediately asked what she meant. Carlo explained to his mother that he had given it to Ayesha. Sylvia weakly replied that she owned the choker that looked exactly the same. Carlo explained to his mother that he had found it inside her jewelry box. He said that Ayesha told him it had originally belonged to her mother and that Sylvia had been keeping it safe for her all this time. At that moment, Ayesha turned towards Sylvia, looked directly into her eyes, and quietly asked if she thought it suited her. Later that night, inside her room, Sylvia frantically began writing inside her diary. As she wrote, she desperately asked herself if she was hallucinating. But the more she thought about it, the more confused she became. She began asking herself which one was the hallucination, the living, breathing Ayesha sitting downstairs right now, or the Ayesha she had killed with her own hands. Sylvia slowly began to break down. She kept asking herself where everything had gone wrong. Then she whispered to herself that this had to be a dream. It had to be. But suddenly, Sylvia heard someone outside her door. Terrified, she nervously asked who it was. Standing outside the door was Ayesha. Ayesha quietly told Sylvia that she felt cold and asked if she could get some clothes. Sylvia silently agreed and weakly told her to help herself from the wardrobe. As Ayesha was about to change, she saucily asked Sylvia if she could turn around because she wanted to try some clothes on. She added that she had a lot of bruises on her body and did not want to alarm her. Sylvia quietly agreed and turned away. A few minutes later, Sylvia asked if Ayesha was finished, but when she did not hear any response, she slowly turned around. And the moment she did, she realized that Ayesha was no longer inside the room. After Ayesha disappeared, Sylvia lay on her bed and tried to sleep. However, even after several hours had passed, she still could not fall asleep. Eventually, Sylvia slowly got out of bed and picked up the lamp resting on the table beside her. As she looked outside the window, she realized that it had started raining. But as she slowly turned back toward her room, she suddenly noticed blood smeared across the other window. Carefully, Sylvia stepped closer to see what it was. And the moment she looked, she saw the dead body of the lawyer she had killed hanging on her window. His mouth was stretched wide open. Sylvia was completely horrified. But at that exact moment, the wardrobe behind her suddenly creaked open. Ayesha suddenly stepped out from inside. In a cold, eerie voice, she said that her neck hurt, and then she said that her wrists and ankles were splitting open, that her whole body was falling apart, and finally she looked at Sylvia and asked her to sew her back together. The instant Sylvia saw that, she screamed in terror. Then she suddenly jolted awake. It had all been a nightmare. As Sylvia sat there clutching herself and breathing heavily, completely terrified, she suddenly noticed a strange smell. She tried to figure out where it was coming from, and after a few moments, she realized that it was coming from underneath the bed. Slowly, Sylvia bent down to look, and the moment she peeked underneath, she saw the lawyer's shoes and glasses. As Sylvia slowly picked up the lawyer's glasses to make sure she was not imagining things, she suddenly began laughing. While laughing, she said that Ayesha must have discovered that she had killed the lawyer, and because of that, she wanted revenge. Sylvia continued laughing hysterically as she said that everything had to be part of Ayesha's conspiracy. Later that morning, inside the room, Carlo told Ayesha that he felt like she had changed. He said that she was no longer as sweet and gentle as she used to be. But Ayesha calmly replied that after everything he'd done to her, how could he possibly expect her to still be sweet and gentle toward him? Carlo was surprised and asked if she was seriously still upset about what happened when they were children. He explained that he only did those things because he liked her, and besides, she had already told him that she had forgiven him. But as Ayesha slowly began taking off her clothes, she quietly explained that the old Ayesha had been weak. She had been as meek as a sheep, and because of that, she found it hard to believe that anyone could truly like someone like her. Meanwhile, on the other side of the room, Nemo sat silently painting Ayesha as he watched everything unfold. But after seeing that side of her, Nemo suddenly burst into tears. Then, in a panic, he began smearing the portrait he had painted of Ayesha. A few days later, Sean quietly stood in front of one of Nemo's paintings. The painting showed a horrifying demonic creature with enormous wings and sharp horns looming over a woman. Sean complimented Nemo and told him that it seemed like he finally had a real understanding of art. He added that judging from Nemo's usual style, this sudden awakening must have been caused by some kind of shock. Nemo quietly told Sean, "Get out." But Sean only smiled and told him not to be like that. Then he asked why Nemo wouldn't just tell him what was causing him so much pain. Without saying another word, Nemo stood up, walked toward the door, and opened it for Sean. Then he calmly told him to leave. As Sean slowly started walking away, he suddenly began laughing. He told Nemo that if he never learned how to communicate properly with other people, he would spend his entire life alone, sulking in a corner no matter how talented he was. Later, while Ayesha was quietly sitting outside and staring at the beautiful scenery, Sean suddenly appeared behind her. He casually remarked that now she was finally free. Sean continued by saying that he envied her, because being alone was far better than being surrounded by idiots. Ayesha immediately asked if by idiots she meant someone like himself. Then she added that his example was a little too close for comfort. Sean smirked and asked if he was really such a terrible person in her eyes. Then he suddenly asked whether Ayesha and Carlo were involved in some kind of funny business. But Ayesha calmly replied that it was none of his concern. Sean shrugged and replied that he wished Ayesha would show the same amount of affection to Nemo. When Ayesha asked why he wasn't including himself in that, Sean smiled. He said that he preferred to take the initiative in situations like this. But for now, I suppose it wasn't the right time. After that, Sean looked directly at Ayesha and told her that he understood her. Then he asked if she had never noticed how different he looked compared to his brothers. Ayesha replied that she had noticed the difference in his hair color. Sean explained that after his mother had Carlo with her first husband, she later gave birth to him with another man. But Sean quickly warned Ayesha not to get the wrong idea. He said that he was nowhere near as unfortunate as she was. At least materially, his life had not been that bad. Sean explained that Gwen had actually been a decent man, but his mother had not married him because her first husband left her. She married him because her first husband had died. When Ayesha quietly asked how he died, Sean began laughing. He called it a truly horrific story. And then, as he slowly walked away, he told her that maybe one day he would tell her all about it. The next day, Sylvia was on her way to the dining table. Even though she was trying to stay composed, she looked exhausted and deeply unsettled, like she had not slept all night. But as Sylvia walked through the hallway, she suddenly turned her head and saw Ayesha coming downstairs while holding a teacup. At the bottom of the stairs, Carlo was already waiting for her, kneeling in front of her. The moment Sylvia saw that, she immediately asked Carlo what he was doing. However, Carlo calmly told his mother that it was nothing. He explained that Ayesha had twisted her ankle and that he was only massaging it for her. As Ayesha and Sylvia silently stared at each other, Carlo gently told Ayesha to come with him and lean on his arm. A moment later, while they were all sitting at the dining table, Carlo called out to his mother and said that he had something he wanted to tell her. When Sylvia asked what it was, Carlo explained that Ayesha's birthday was this weekend and that he wanted to hold a huge banquet in her honor and invite all of their relatives. Then, as Carlo gently wrapped an arm around Ayesha's shoulder and smiled, he said that during the banquet he was going to announce their engagement. The moment he said that, the entire room fell silent. While Carlo waited for his mother's response, he continued speaking and told Sylvia that he hoped she would not object. He said that if she truly loved him, then she should understand what he wanted. Then, as Sylvia suddenly began laughing, Carlo coldly added that if she refused, he would leave this place together with Ayesha. But unexpectedly, Sylvia smiled. She told Carlo that not only would she organize the engagement for him, but she was also going to prepare a wonderful birthday present for Ayesha. The moment Carlo heard that, he was overjoyed. He immediately looked at Ayesha and asked if she had heard that. He happily told her that his mother was finally allowing them to be together. However, Sean quietly looked at Ayesha and told her that she should be happy to hear something like that. But then he suddenly asked her why she wasn't smiling. The moment Ayesha heard that, she slowly forced herself to smile. But her smile looked strange and unsettling. As she quietly thanked Sylvia, Sylvia suddenly went silent for a moment, clearly surprised by the unsettling smile on Ayesha's face. Then Sean looked at her and asked if it was just his imagination or if Ayesha's smile looked different somehow. Right away, Carlo looked directly at Sean and asked him since when he cared so much about Ayesha. But Sean only laughed and told Carlo to calm down. Then he said not to worry because he was sure that their love would eventually turn Ayesha back into how she used to be. Finally, the weekend arrived. On the day of Ayesha's birthday, every servant in the house was busy preparing the tables for the grand banquet. Meanwhile, Sylvia simply stood above them on the upper floor, quietly watching everything while holding a small bottle filled with an unknown substance. Then, as Sylvia slowly began mixing the stew and tasting it herself, she carefully prepared each plate by one. But suddenly, she took out the strange bottle she had been holding earlier and carefully poured the unknown substance into one of the bowls of stew. After that, Sylvia secretly marked the bottom of the plate where she had poured the substance. Then she quietly left the kitchen. But the moment she was gone, the kitchen door slowly creaked open. Later, while Sylvia was carrying the marked plate, one of the servants told her that she should leave that kind of work to them. However, Sylvia only let out a faint laugh and said that this was an important day for their family, and as the mistress of the house, of course she had to take part in the preparations. Then, after placing the marked plate on the table, Sylvia turned toward the servant named Nina and asked where Ayesha was. Nina explained that Ayesha was currently trying on the new gown that Sylvia had prepared for her. Not long after, the guests began to arrive and slowly took their assigned seats. Then Sean appeared and tried to sit beside Carlo, but Carlo immediately stopped him. When Sean asked why, Carlo told him that Ayesha always sat next to him. However, Sean simply smiled and replied that Carlo and Ayesha had all the time in the world, and that asking why they should not spend a little time showing some brotherly affection while they still could. As he said that, Sean placed a hand on Carlo's shoulder and quietly whispered that he was not a child anymore. He told him that he needed to learn how to control his emotions. Otherwise, he would end up losing Ayesha. The moment Carlo heard that, he snapped. He immediately warned Sean that it was none of his business and told him not to get any strange ideas about Ayesha. But Sean ignored him. Instead, he simply told Carlo to look at their mother, who was already about to give her speech. Then Sylvia finally began speaking. She welcomed all the guests and announced that today was the 18th birthday of her daughter, Ayesha. After that, she thanked everyone for coming and expressed her deepest gratitude on behalf of the entire family. Then Sylvia smiled and announced that it was finally time to welcome their most beautiful princess, Ayesha. The moment Ayesha appeared wearing the beautiful gown that Sylvia had specially prepared for her, every guest was left stunned. Everyone began to praise her beauty. They said that she looked even lovelier than a real princess. Others said that she truly looked like royalty. Meanwhile, Sylvia's cousin quietly leaned toward her son, Carl, and told him not to let this opportunity go to waste. At the same time, Sean looked at Carlo and told him that he was a lucky man. And with a warm smile on his face, Carlo agreed. He said that Ayesha was an angel sent to him by God. Then, Sylvia continued her speech. She announced that aside from celebrating Ayesha's birthday, she also had another piece of happy news to share on such a joyful occasion. However, she said that she would wait until everyone had finished eating before revealing it because this news might come as a huge surprise. Then, as Sylvia gently guided Ayesha toward her seat, she quietly explained that from this day onward, Ayesha would take the seat of the mistress. As Ayesha glanced towards Sylvia, Sylvia finally turned to the guests and told everyone to enjoy the feast. Moments later, Sylvia carefully watched Ayesha from across the table. She noticed that Ayesha still had not touched the bowl of stew that she had prepared. But suddenly, Ayesha stood up and calmly told the servants that she needed to use the lavatory. As Ayesha walked away, Nemo noticed the strange look on his mother's face and quietly asked her if she was feeling ill. However, Sylvia immediately replied that she was fine. A short while later, Ayesha finally returned to her seat. Instead of eating the stew, she casually picked up an apple and took a bite. As she did, she noticed Sylvia staring at her. So Ayesha looked directly at her and quietly asked what was wrong. Sylvia forced a smile and asked if she liked the gown. Ayesha calmly replied that she liked it very much. Then, while staring straight into Sylvia's eyes, she quietly said that she hoped Sylvia would continue showing her kindness act. With a smile on her face, Sylvia agreed. At the same time, she watched Ayesha lift a spoon and prepare to drink the stew. As Sylvia stared at her, she silently prayed in her mind for Ayesha to die right there in front of everyone and never come back to life again. But the moment Ayesha swallowed the stew, someone else suddenly began coughing. Instead of Ayesha, Carlo suddenly started violently coughing up blood. But even though blood was pouring from Carlo's mouth and nose, he still forced himself to stand. Slowly, he staggered toward Ayesha while reaching into his coat. Then, he pulled out the engagement ring that he had planned to use for their announcement. With trembling hands, Carlo placed it down in front of Ayesha. But suddenly, Carlo began coughing up even more blood. And before he could say a single word, he collapsed onto the ground. The moment that happened, everyone rushed toward him in panic. Even Sylvia ran toward him. But as she called Carlo's name with a trembling voice, Sylvia's vision suddenly began to blur. And only seconds later, she collapsed to the ground and fainted. Then, one day, while heavy snow quietly fell outside, Ayesha sent every servant in the house away for a long Christmas holiday. As the servants were preparing to leave, one of them hesitated and asked Ayesha if it was really all right not to send Lady Sylvia to the hospital. However, Ayesha calmly told her not to worry. She explained that Sylvia was simply in a state of shock. According to her, it was a pain of the heart, and only time could heal it. As the servants thanked Ayesha and prepared to leave once again, a carriage arrived. For a moment, they wondered if it was another guest. But when the carriage door opened, Sean stepped out. As the servants greeted him, Sean looked at the way they were dressed and asked why they were carrying luggage. Then he asked if they had all been fired. However, the servants quickly explained that Ayesha had given them a full week of paid holiday. The moment Sean heard that, he smiled faintly and said that Ayesha would probably make a much more generous mistress than his mother ever was. Then one of the servants asked Sean where he had been all this time. Sean explained that he had been staying with the Duke and giving his daughter piano lessons. When the servant curiously asked if the Duke's daughter was pretty and whether she liked him, Sean let out a quiet laugh. Then he explained that she was still too young. However, he added that the Duchess seemed to approve of him very much. In fact, she had even asked him to become her private pianist. But just as Sean was about to enter the manor, he saw Ayesha standing silently by the entrance. The snow continued to fall around her, making her look colder than ever. Sean called out to her and told her it was freezing outside. Then he gently asked her to come inside. However, Ayesha coldly asked how he could still be in the mood to play piano after everything that had happened. Then she asked that Sylvia truly did not mean very much to him. Sean only gave a faint laugh. He explained that the family's finances had been falling apart for a long time, and if nobody bothered to make money, the estate would eventually collapse. Then Sean asked Ayesha whether she, Nemo, and their mother had managed to get along while he was away. But Ayesha's immediately answered that they had not. Then, without warning, Sean gently wrapped his arms around her. He told her that he was the eldest son now, and that from now on, he would take care of all of them. But Ayesha only coldly asked him if he liked snow. Sean paused for a moment before answering. He said that he liked it when he was drinking tea in front of the fireplace. But Ayesha quietly said that she loved snow. She explained that one of the servants, Anne, once told her that on the day she was born, it had snowed just as heavily as this. Sean smiled faintly and said that maybe that's why Ayesha was so beautiful and so cold. But Ayesha quietly said that his return had come at the perfect time. When Sean asked what she meant, Ayesha slowly explained that snow covers every trace of filth and corruption, and under the first light of the sun, the world is born again in absolute purity. A moment later, Nemo was quietly painting in his room. But suddenly, Sean appeared behind him. The moment Nemo noticed him, he immediately turned around and asked Sean when he had come in. Sean calmly answered that he had been there for quite a while. He explained that Nemo looked so focused that he didn't want to interrupt him. Then, just as Nemo tried to hide the painting, Sean stopped him. He told him that he had already seen it before and that there was no point in hiding it anymore. When Nemo asked if he understood what it meant, Sean gave a faint laugh. Then he said that he probably understood it much earlier than Nemo did. The moment Nemo heard that, he immediately rushed towards Sean and grabbed him. Then he asked him that if he really understood, how could he still act so calm and indifferent while he was in so much pain? However, Sean only gently apologized. He told Nemo that he wasn't like him. Nemo bitterly agreed. He said that Sean was right because he was nothing like him. Then Nemo said that he had almost forgotten what kind of person Sean truly was. He called Sean heartless, and he said that of course Sean didn't care about the pain of other people. But Sean slowly stepped closer to him. Then he quietly told Nemo not to turn him into some kind of monster. He said that he never chose this fate. With a strangely comforting smile, Sean told Nemo that he didn't think pain was always a bad thing. He said that pain could shape someone into an extraordinary artist. But as Nemo finally broke down, he quietly told Sean that that wasn't what he wanted. Then, while the two of them stared at the painting of Ayesha, Sean thoughtfully replied that what Nemo truly wanted had already been immortalized in his art. After that, Sean told Nemo to treasure his talent. Then he explained that he had actually come to talk to him about something else. Sean told Nemo that he should spend more time with his mother. Confused, Nemo immediately asked Sean why he didn't spend more time with his mother himself. Sean explained that his mother loved Nemo more, and because of that, he could never love her as much as Nemo did. But Nemo coldly replied that those were only excuses. He said that Sean didn't truly love anyone. Then Sean informed Nemo that all of the servants had gone home for Christmas. And after that, he quietly asked who had been taking care of their mother. Confused, Nemo asked him what he meant. Sean explained that he had only just returned today, and then he asked who he thought had sent all the servants away. The moment he heard that, Nemo immediately realized that it had been Ayesha. Then Nemo quickly asked Sean to come with him. But Sean calmly refused. Instead, he said that he should probably go prepare a nice healthy lunch for all of them. As Nemo stared at him, Sean smiled and asked if he thought he was planning to poison him. But Nemo replied that he thought Sean didn't know how to cook. Sean laughed softly. Then he told Nemo that there were still many things about him that Nemo did not know. Meanwhile, while Sylvia was unconscious, she could not stop herself from dreaming about Carlo. In the dream, she desperately chased after him, and the moment she finally caught up to him, she tightly hugged him and said that she thought she had lost him. However, Carlo looked at her in confusion and asked what was wrong. He reminded her that she was supposed to be teaching him how to hunt. Confused, Sylvia looked down and saw that she was holding a rifle. Realizing where they were, she agreed and said that they had come there to hunt. After that, Sylvia admitted that she had a terrible nightmare. Carlo laughed and jokingly commented that even his mother could be scared of nightmares. But with a warm smile on her face, Sylvia gently replied that she was not scared of nightmares. She was only scared of losing him. Not long after, Sylvia managed to hit a hare. Excited, she immediately called out to Carlo and asked him to look. But the moment she turned toward him, she froze. Carlo was down on his knees coughing. The instant Sylvia saw that, she rushed toward him and desperately asked what was wrong. But Carlo simply smiled and quietly asked her why she had killed him. As Sylvia cried in her sleep and repeatedly called out Carlo's name while apologizing, she finally woke up. The moment she glanced beside her, she saw Ayesha standing near the mirror while looking at her reflection. After noticing that Sylvia was awake, Ayesha looked at her and calmly said that she was up very late and perhaps she should not take so many pills. However, the moment Sylvia saw Ayesha wearing her dress, she immediately said that it belonged to her. But Ayesha coldly replied that no, everything in the manor belonged to her. At that moment, Sylvia finally admitted that she had lost and that Ayesha had won. She bitterly said that Ayesha had even sacrificed her own fiancé just to defeat her. Then Ayesha slowly walked closer and asked if the pills had scrambled her mind. She told Sylvia that she had never poisoned the stew. In fact, she said that perhaps that particular bowl had actually been meant for her. Hearing that, Sylvia's voice began to tremble as she admitted that she regretted it. But suddenly, Sylvia grabbed Ayesha by her dress and furiously shouted that what she really regretted was not killing her the moment she refused to call her mother. Sylvia screamed that if she had done it back then, Ayesha never would have had the chance to pretend to be a saint and seduce her sons. She kept blaming her, saying that everything happened because she was dirty and that it was all her fault. However, Ayesha calmly answered that none of it was her fault. She told her that if she had saved even the smallest piece of love for the little girl she used to be, then perhaps she could have spent the rest of her old age in peace. But instead, she never even loved her father, much less her. Even so, Sylvia insisted that she had loved Gwen and desperately asked why else she would have married him. But Ayesha quietly told her that it was finally time to be honest with herself. Then Ayesha said that her father probably had never truly loved Sylvia either. Even so, he still did more than enough for her three sons, and no matter how much Sylvia hated him, she never should have killed him. With a weak voice, Sylvia immediately denied it. She insisted that she had not killed him and that he simply fell down the stairs by himself. But Ayesha replied that Sylvia was not the only person living in the mansion, and if she truly believed that she controlled everything, then she had only been fooling herself. She reminded her that she had even gone into the freezing pond to search for the box Sylvia had sunk there so she could recover his shoes and glasses. She looked directly at Sylvia and said that the lawyer had been innocent, yet Sylvia still killed him. And even that had not been enough for her, because Sylvia had also killed her. The moment Sylvia heard that, she stared at Ayesha in horror and asked if she was a demon. But as Ayesha gently touched Sylvia's hair, she softly told her to look into the mirror herself and see whether a demon is staring back at her. She said that Sylvia had gone her way for far too long, and now God was finally passing judgment on her. Then she coldly added that God had brought her back from hell. After that, Ayesha leaned closer and whispered that she would torment Sylvia second by second until the day she reached her rightful place in hell. But neither of them realized that Nemo had been standing outside the room the entire time, quietly listening through the door. Then all of a sudden, Sylvia began to laugh. She admitted that Ayesha was right and that everything was her fault, but she also said that she was no longer afraid of hell. As she said that, Sylvia reached underneath her pillow, pulled out the rifle, and pointed it directly at Ayesha. Then she coldly declared that she was already living in hell. The moment Ayesha saw the rifle, she immediately recognized it and said that it belonged to Carlo. Sylvia agreed and replied that it was not a toy. She angrily said that Carlo died because of Ayesha and now she was going to avenge him. But Ayesha suddenly shouted at her and demanded to know if she truly dared to kill her again. She asked if she was not afraid that the bullet might hit one of her remaining sons. Then she looked straight at her and asked if she even could kill her. Confused, Sylvia weakly asked if she wasn't Ayesha, but Ayesha answered that she was. Still trembling, Sylvia insisted that she had died, that she herself had killed her. Then, as Ayesha slowly grabbed the barrel of the rifle, she agreed. She said that Sylvia had killed the weak and helpless Ayesha from before, but with a cold look in her eyes, she told Sylvia that she could never kill the person she had become now. Then, as Ayesha began to walk toward the door, Sylvia told her that if she truly wanted to repent, then she should save the bullet for herself. However, just before Ayesha could leave, Sylvia suddenly spoke again. She said that things were finally starting to come back to her. There were details she should never have ignored, and now she finally understood everything. Sylvia said that none of this was a conspiracy, and there was no supernatural force behind it. The moment Ayesha heard that, she stopped walking for a brief second. Meanwhile, outside the room, Nemo was just about to step in. But Sylvia continued speaking. She stared at Ayesha and said that it had all been nothing more than a simple trick, yet somehow she had never noticed it until now. As Sylvia raised the rifle toward her once again, she suddenly burst into loud laughter and said that it was almost laughable. And just as Sylvia was about to pull the trigger, Nemo weakly whispered, "No." But before Sylvia could hear him, it was already too late. Sylvia pulled the trigger. The rifle fired straight toward Ayesha. But at that exact moment, Nemo suddenly threw himself in front of her, and instead of Ayesha being shot, Nemo was the one who got hit. A moment later, Nemo slowly opened his eyes while lying on the floor. The first thing he saw was Ayesha calmly sitting on the bed, quietly reading a diary. The instant he saw her, Nemo immediately raised his head and asked where his mother was. But instead of answering him right away, Ayesha calmly remarked that he had fainted at the sight of blood. When Nemo asked again where his mother was, Ayesha told him that compared to Carlo, he had been much luckier. He had only lost an ear. However, Nemo kept desperately asking where his mother had gone and begged Ayesha to tell him. At that point, Ayesha quietly said that he really should read his mother's diary because he probably did not know her nearly as well as he thought. Even so, Nemo begged Ayesha to spare her mother. Ayesha looked at him for a moment before finally agreeing. She said that because he had saved her life earlier, the least she could do was let him say a proper goodbye. Confused, Nemo asked her what she meant. Then Ayesha explained that his mother had gone to the forest, and she quietly added that the dead had been waiting for this day. Not long after, Nemo ran outside and followed the tracks his mother had left behind in the snow. After running for a long time, Nemo finally stopped for a moment to catch his breath. And not far away, he finally saw her. The moment Nemo saw his mother, he immediately ran toward her while desperately calling out to her. Hearing his voice, Sylvia slowly turned her head and weakly asked if he was all right. Nemo quickly replied that it was nothing serious. The instant Sylvia heard that, she completely broke down in tears and thanked God that he was safe. Then Nemo begged his mother to come back. He told her that she would get frostbite dressed like that in the freezing cold. But Sylvia suddenly shouted at him to stay back. She told Nemo that she did not want him to see her like this. Then, after a moment of silence, Sylvia asked him if he hated her. Nemo immediately answered that he did not hate her. He only wanted her to go back to the way she used to be. However, Sylvia kept walking forward through the snow as she quietly replied that there was no way to turn time back, and that the dead could never come back to life. With a hopeless look on her face, Sylvia tightly gripped the rifle and said that there was no point in saying anything anymore. There was no point in doing anything either. As far as she was concerned, there was no other path left for her. But Nemo told her that was not true. He said that the two of them could leave this place together and that everything would be all right. Hearing that, Sylvia suddenly laughed. She said that once she had believed the same thing. She had believed that everything would be fine when her sons were born. But as they grew older, day after day, she slowly lost them one by one. But Nemo immediately told her that she had not lost him. At those words, Sylvia slowly turned back toward him and she softly said that he was so kind. Then she asked why she had never noticed that before. She admitted that she had always thought he was distant and timid, completely unlike her. After that, Sylvia began talking about her sons. She said that when Carlo was born, she had still been deeply in love with his father, and because of that, she ended up spoiling him. Then she said that when Sean was born, she has still loved his father as well. But Sean had always been just as impossible to understand as his father had been. But Nemo was different. Sylvia quietly admitted that she had never intended to have him. Yet she said that now he was the only one she had left, and the only one who had stayed by her side. Then, as Sylvia slowly began to cry, she apologized to Nemo. She told him that she had been far too selfish. She had made so many unforgivable mistakes that even if she kept living, she knew she would never find happiness again. And with that, Sylvia slowly raised a rifle and pointed it at herself. The moment Nemo saw that, he immediately rushed toward her and shouted no. But Sylvia warned him not to come any closer. Then, as she pressed the barrel against her chest, she told Nemo to turn around. Completely devastated, Nemo slowly turned his back to her. As Sylvia looked at him one last time through her tears, she suddenly called out his name. Then she asked him if he loved her. Without hesitation, Nemo answered that no matter what she did, he could never hate her. The moment Sylvia heard that, she froze for a second. Then she quietly replied that he did not love her. He loved Ayesha, the girl she killed. And for the very last time, Sylvia asked Nemo to forgive her. Then she placed the barrel of the rifle into her mouth and pulled the trigger. As Nemo heard the gunshot behind him, he silently broke down in pain. He slowly fell to his knees, clutched himself tightly, and began to remember a moment from the past. It was the day he had been painting Ayesha. Back then, Nemo asked her if he could ask her something. Ayesha smiled and said yes. Then Nemo explained that sometimes she was sweet and gentle, while other times she was as cold as ice. After that, he asked her why. As Ayesha slowly walked closer to him, she softly said that she would tell him a secret. A secret meant only for the two of them. When Nemo asked if it really was a secret only the two of them could know, Ayesha smiled and said yes. She told him that it was because she trusted him and believed that he was just as kind and trustworthy as she was. Hearing that, Nemo promised that he would never betray her. Then Ayesha began to explain. She said that there were two versions of her. One was warm like the sunlight in spring, and the other was cold like the snow in December. Ayesha explained that whenever she was unhappy, the colder version of her would appear. So whenever she saw that side of her, she asked him to please be kind to her, even kinder than he already was. Back in the present, Nemo finally returned to the manor. As he pushed open the front door and stepped inside, he saw Sean calmly sitting alone at the dining table. The moment Sean noticed him, he simply said that Nemo had finally come back. Nemo looked at him in silence. Then Sean calmly asked if he had been hurt. At that moment, Nemo quietly told him that their mother was dead. But when Sean heard that, he remained completely calm. There was no trace of emotion on his face as he simply gave a cold reply. The moment Nemo heard that answer, he immediately went after Sean and demanded that he at least pretend to be sad. However, Sean quietly replied that everyone dies eventually, and wherever their mother was now, at least she wouldn't be lonely. Then, as Nemo began walking away, he told Sean that his mother in the forest. He said he hoped Sean would visit her from time to time. And before leaving, Nemo added that the painting he had hung in the living room was his final gift to both of them. Confused, Sean asked him what he meant. Nemo quietly explained that Sean and Ayesha were meant for each other. Then he told Sean that he wished the two of them all the happiness in the world. After hearing that, Sean softly replied that he hoped Nemo would find happiness too. Later, while Ayesha was on her way back to the mansion, she suddenly ran into Nemo. He was leaving with a bag in his hands. As they passed each other, neither of them looked the other in the eye. They simply kept walking without saying a word. But the moment Ayesha stepped through the front entrance of the mansion, she immediately saw the painting that Nemo had talked about with Shar earlier. Not long after, Sean appeared and slowly walked down the stairs. He looked at the painting and casually remarked that it was quite stunning before asking Ayesha what she thought of it. The painting showed two versions of Ayesha. One was cold, like snow in December. The other had been beheaded, yet somehow still looked as warm as sunlight in spring. A few moments later, Ayesha quietly sat down and asked Sean if he had any questions. Sean replied that not really, but there was a lot he wanted to say. As he sat down across from her, Sean commented that now it was finally just the two of them, and that they had all the time in the world to get along. When Ayesha asked him if he was not afraid of her, Sean simply laughed. He told her that if she really was a demon, then that only made things more interesting. However, Sean went on to say that her little trick was not actually that hard to figure out. According to him, all someone had to do was pay attention. Still, Carlo had always been far too guileless. Sean said that Carlo probably would not have believed Ayesha if she had told her herself. Meanwhile, Nemo was too soft-spoken. Instead of speaking his feelings, he poured them into his paintings. Sean continued by saying that while everyone else saw the other version of her as some kind of angel, innocent to the point of stupidity, sadly, this was no heaven. When Ayesha asked him how long he had known, Sean explained that he had known for years. He remembered following her into the forest back then, but he got lost. He wandered around for days before finally finding his way home. Afterward, he lied and told everyone that he had simply run away. Then Sean looked at her and asked if she remembered. At that moment, Ayesha glanced down at the score on her arm, the one Sean had given her when they were children. She asked him if that was why he had cut her, so he could tell the two of them apart. Sean smiled and said no. He admitted that the scar had come in handy, but that was not why he did it. He said that he had only wanted to leave an impression on her. Then he added that intuition alone was enough for him to tell the two Ayeshas apart. When Ayesha asked him why he had done it, Sean suddenly brought up Carlo's death. He explained that all he had done was mark another bowl of stew and switch it with the poisoned one. Since everyone except for him and Ayesha ate the stew, anyone could have died that day. However, Sean admitted that he never expected it to be Carlo. He claimed that he had been completely heartbroken. When Ayesha coldly asked him if he even had a heart, Sean only laughed. He told her that he had been just as heartbroken as she was. Ayesha then asked Sean what he gained from helping her and what exactly he wanted from her. Instead of answering, he asked what she thought. He reminded her that he had already told her that he understood her. Then, Sean finally revealed that Ayesha had a twin sister. However, he admitted that even now, he still did not know which one of them was the real Ayesha. All he knew was that there had always been two of them, and he had known that for a very long time. Sean said that he found it amusing. When Ayesha asked what he meant by that, an old memory suddenly came back to her. Several years earlier, when they were still children, the two sisters had gone to their father and confessed that they did not like Sylvia. They asked him why he had married her. Gwen explained that he couldn't take care of both of them and run the estate all by himself. But Ayesha asked her father why he had never told Sylvia that they were twins. As Gwen looked toward a portrait of his late wife Norma, he quietly admitted that he didn't know either. He said that it had been their mother's dying wish. Then, while gently patting the two girls on the head, Gwen explained that they should never show themselves at the same time. Still, he said that it didn't really matter if someone ever came to find out. According to him, they should simply think of it as a little game. After hearing that, Ayesha asked her twin if she disliked Sylvia too. Her sister smiled and replied that she hated Sylvia as well. Then she suggested that they pretend to be one person and trick her. She said it would be fun. Back in the present, Sean explained that the two sisters used to take turns sleeping in the bedroom. Most of the time, it was Ayesha's sister, the one who later died, who stayed inside the mansion. However, when Sylvia's niece came to stay for the summer, she took the room, and Ayesha's sister was forced to move into the attic. Sean admitted that he wasn't particularly close to his mother, so there wasn't much he could do to help. Unfortunately, the two sisters eventually began switching places inside the small wooden shack hidden in the forest, the same shack where Sean and Ayesha had their chance encounter. Then Sean looked at Ayesha and casually commented that sleeping in a haystack must have been nice. Ayesha quietly agreed, except during winter. Then Sean asked if it usually was her sister who came to the dining table, while Ayesha waited in the shack for leftovers. But before he could continue, Ayesha suddenly cut him off. She told him that he did not understand at all. Back then, she had never found any of it fun. She had only found it exhausting. At that time, the kind and gentle Ayesha had often told her sister to come and eat inside the mansion, insisting that nobody would notice anyway. But Ayesha always refused. She said that she hated every single one of them and did not want to be around them. Then Ayesha admitted that she had spent every second of her life thinking about how to drive them all away. When Sean asked if that included him, Ayesha replied that only her sister had ever thought he was special. Then she asked Sean why he had never loved her the way Carlo and Nemo did. Sean gave a faint laugh before leaning closer to her. He asked why she had never loved him the way other girls did. For a moment, Ayesha said nothing. Instead, she picked up her cup of coffee and quietly took a sip. Then Sean stood up. He told her that he understood why the two sisters had gone through all that trouble just to pretend to be a single person. In the end, it was necessary. Sean added that his mother was capable of anything. Ayesha then asked Sean if he had read Sylvia's diary. Sean answered yes. He remarked that keeping a diary was never a very smart decision. Then Ayesha asked if he also knew that Sylvia had murdered his real father. Sean admitted that he did. However, he said that he did not hate his mother because of it. After all, he had never even met his real father. Ayesha then pointed out that Sylvia's diary also mentioned Sean and his stepfather. She asked if it was true that he had killed him. Sean calmly answered yes. Ayesha coldly remarked that in a certain way, Sean and Sylvia were very alike. Sean slowly stepped closer to her and replied that the two of them were quite alike as well. Then Sean explained that his mother must have passed by the shack on the night she led Ayesha's sister into the forest. According to him, Ayesha must have seen them together and followed them the entire time. Sean said that if Ayesha had only shown herself, then maybe her sister wouldn't have died. The moment she heard that, another memory rushed back to her. She remembered telling her sister that one of the servants had mentioned a lawyer calling earlier that day. When her sister asked about the lawyer, Ayesha explained that Sylvia had dragged a large crate into the forest in the middle of the night. She said it seemed suspicious. Her sister agreed, and said that maybe it had something to do with them. So Ayesha suggested that her sister bring it up at dinner and watch Sylvia's reaction. Her sister agreed. Back in the present, Sean explained that her sister had always tried to make everyone love her. She wanted everyone around her to adore her. Sean even revealed that she had agreed to let Nemo paint her nude. Then he looked directly at Ayesha and told her that she despised her sister, but at the same time, she envied her. And because of that, she had done nothing. She had simply stood there and watched as her sister died. Sean continued by saying that Ayesha had grown tired of living as only half of a person. She had grown tired of Carlo and Nemo loving her sister instead of her. So in the end, she returned to the mansion with a bandage around her neck. At that moment, Ayesha remembered another conversation with her sister. Back then, She had called Carlo and Nemo weak and pathetic, but her sister only smiled and said that they loved her very much. When Ayesha asked if she loved them too, her sister explained that the more people loved them, the harder it would be for Sylvia to hurt them. However, Ayesha insisted that her sister was wrong. She said that Carlo and Nemo did not love both of them. They only loved her kind and sweet sister. But her sister smiled and reminded her that they were supposed to be one person. Then her sister admitted that for some reason it wasn't working on Sean. She asked Ayesha if she knew how to make Sean fall in love with her. The moment Ayesha heard that, she became irritated, but her sister only said that it was the only way to take back what rightfully belonged to them. Back in the present, Sean explained that Ayesha's sister had only sent her to question Sylvia about the lawyer after she had seen Sylvia disposing of the body. Then he asked Ayesha if she was right. Sean added that it seemed the two of them had finally reached an understanding. At that moment, Ayesha calmly asked Sean whether he was planning to kill her or if he was offering to let her kill him. Sean smiled. He looked at her and said that this was exactly what he liked about her. Then he asked if she still did not understand. He told her that the two of them needed each other. But as Ayesha stared down at the scars on her palm, she quietly replied that she did not understand at all. She said that they were only siblings without any blood relation. To her, Sean was no different from everyone else. He was just another bastard who had caused her pain. However, as Sean slowly began removing his clothes, he told her that what she felt was not pain. Then he leaned closer and asked if she knew what made him into the person he was. He revealed the scars that ran from his shoulder all the way down across his chest. He explained that when he was little, he was just like her. He never smiled. But ever since receiving those scars, the world had become far more beautiful to him. Because after going through something like that, nothing could possibly be worse. Finally, Sean looked at Ayesha and asked if she wanted to know what happened between him and his late stepfather. And with that, Sean began to tell his story. Back then, when Sean was still a child, he was constantly tormented by his stepfather. One night, his stepfather ordered him to take off his clothes while staring at him and cruelly remarking that Sean was even more beautiful than Sylvia had been in her youth. As his stepfather grabbed him by the shoulder, he looked closely at Sean and bitterly said that Sean did not resemble him at all. He demanded to know whether Sean understood what that meant, but Sean stayed silent. His stepfather continued, angrily reminding him that he had fed him and clothed him all these years, yet Sean could not even bring himself to look him in the eye. Suddenly, he wrapped his hands around Sean's throat and began strangling him, demanding that Sean finally say it out loud. He wanted Sean to admit that he was nothing more than a bastard Sylvia had with another man. As his stepfather leaned closer, he bitterly explained that he had only gone away to war for a year, while Sylvia was so certain that he would return in a coffin. While laughing bitterly to himself, he revealed that Sylvia had cheated on him with one of his own subordinates. Meanwhile, Sean struggled to breathe and coughed as he desperately caught his breath. At that moment, Sean quietly called him my lord and told him that he would never be happy if he kept clinging to the past. The moment he heard that, Sean's stepfather grabbed him by the hair and yanked him closer. He asked Sean if he had any idea how ridiculous that sounded coming from him. After that, he violently shoved Sean away for daring to lecture him. However, Sean calmly replied that the subordinate he kept talking about was already dead and that his mother had already paid for her mistake with his life. He even asked if he could not simply forgive her. But his stepfather coldly answered that Sylvia had only done it because she felt cheated out of a better life. As he glared at Sean, he admitted that what Sylvia had done had only made him hate Sean even more. At that point, Sean slowly stood up and looked directly into his stepfather's eyes. He quietly told him that if his existence caused him that much pain, he should just kill him and begged him to stop torturing him. However, Sean's stepfather refused. He said, "Not yet." A moment later, he suddenly shouted that it seemed Sean could not wait to get away from him. As Sean apologized, he quietly said that perhaps he needed a drink first. With that, Sean reached for a bottle of wine. As he looked toward his stepfather, the man mockingly told him to go ahead and drink the whole thing. But suddenly, in that exact moment, Sean smashed the wine bottle over his stepfather's head. The bottle shattered instantly, and blood began running down his stepfather's face. Shocked, the man stared at Sean and demanded to know if he had gone mad. Before he could react, Sean grabbed a lamp sitting on the table and tried to strike him again. However, his stepfather quickly caught his arm. Reaching toward the knife on the side table, Sean's stepfather coldly asked if Sean really thought he wouldn't hurt him. And with that, he slashed Sean across the chest, cutting all the way up to his shoulder. As Sean cried out in pain, his stepfather looked at him and said that if he truly wanted to kill someone, he should use a knife. While pressing the blade deeper into Sean's wound, he asked if it hurt. He cruelly added that a few more cuts should be enough to teach him a lesson. But in that moment, Sean finally managed to break free. Without thinking, he turned and ran. His stepfather immediately tried to chase after him. However, as he stepped forward, he accidentally stepped onto the broken glass from the wine bottle. The moment he did, he slipped and crashed to the floor. Sean turned back and looked at him. A piece of broken glass had lodged itself directly into his stepfather's eye. As he writhed on the floor in pain, his stepfather immediately began blaming Sean, screaming that all of this was his fault. He desperately ordered Sean to call for a servant or his mother. Sean quietly apologized and said that he would go get help. But just as Sean turned to leave, his stepfather suddenly shouted after him. He warned Sean that if he lost even a single eyelash, he would make Sean suffer for the rest of his life. The moment Sean heard those words, he stopped. Slowly, he turned around. Without thinking, he rushed toward the knife lying on the floor. In an instant, Sean lunged at his stepfather from behind, grabbed him by the neck, and drove the knife straight into his throat. He stabbed him so violently that it almost looked as if his neck was being torn apart. Sean slowly pulled the knife back out and his stepfather collapsed onto the floor. For a moment, Sean crouched down beside him and placed his hand under his nose to see if he was still breathing. But after realizing that his stepfather was dead, an unsettling smile slowly spread across Sean's face as he was covered in blood. After hearing all of that, Ayeshah quietly admitted that she had never known. Sean asked her if she felt sorry for him, but Ayeshah said that what she was feeling was not pity. Instead, she asked Sean if he ever noticed why she never looked him in the eyes whenever they spoke. Sean replied that he had never had the faintest idea. At that moment, Ayeshah gently reached out and touched the scar that ran across his chest. In a quiet voice, she confessed that it was because she was afraid. Afraid that if she ever looked directly into his eyes, she would fall in love with him. The moment she heard that, Sean smiled. He told her that she shouldn't have said that out loud. When Ayeshah softly asked why, Sean leaned closer, kissed her, and whispered, because what she feared was already about to happen. Not long after, the final letter left behind by Gwen's late wife, Norma, was revealed. In the letter, Norma wrote that she knew Gwen might one day fall in love with another woman. However, she feared that their daughters would become the target of jealousy. Because of that, she begged him to keep the truth hidden. She wanted him to keep it a secret that Ayeshah had a twin sister, hoping that by hiding the truth, he could protect both girls. Later, while the two of them were laying together in bed, Sean suddenly asked Ayeshah what her sister's name had been. But Ayeshah only smiled and quietly said that it didn't matter anymore. After a brief silence, Sean asked the one question that had been on his mind all along. He asked whether the two of them would ever truly live happily ever after. At first, Ayeshah playfully asked him what he thought, but as the two of them quietly stared into each other's eyes, her expression slowly changed. Finally, in a soft and uncertain voice, she asked him the same thing. Will we? Years later, the truth about Ayeshah still remained unclear. As two people sat quietly beside the piano, one of them admitted that they no longer knew what truly happened and what only became a memory. The past had become blurred, turning into something far more beautiful and far more tragic than it really was. They admitted that they never learned every detail. All they knew was that Ayeshah could never have children with Sean, and because of that, the two of them constantly fought. But in the end, they chose not to remember Ayeshah for her suffering, nor for the terrible way she died. Instead, they chose to believe that somewhere, Ayeshah and Sean had finally been able to live happily together, that they spent the rest of their lives side by side, grew old together, and died peacefully many years later. And as they sat there in silence beside the piano, they softly said that perhaps those memories are still here, inside this house, beside this piano.